Thank you very much, everyone, for having me here, especially Aaron, Toby, and the whole team at 4A, as well as all the participants in the intensive. It's been very exciting and very intense so far. I really look forward to our conversation getting even more in depth over the next couple days. I'm sorry, you'll have to forgive me for having to use this massive bundle of notes here. I'm used to being very mediated. I like to have a lot of screens and things in between me and other people, and so I need to kind of have something here to produce that effect. We've been watching just some images cycling through of this exhibition that I recently completed at the Yulin Center in Beijing called Art PostInternet, which was curated with Karen Archie, based in New York. We can just let that keep going kind of throughout the course of the talk, which will provide a little bit of color and flavor maybe to what we're talking about. I don't like to do particularly linear PowerPoints. I don't want to kind of run through things one by one, so it'll give more of a general impression of what we're looking at. So the first question, of course, is what is post-internet? Why are we using this ridiculous phrase when everyone knows that we're nowhere near the end of the internet? We haven't reached the end of the internet sign yet. Of course, the most important thing is that the post refers to a sense of continuity more than it does a sense of rupture. The post implies that we have reached a point where an awareness of the internet is ingrained in our very beings on a muscular level, on a cellular level. To return to something that we spoke about this afternoon, you could not be an artist practicing today without an awareness of the internet. Why do we talk about post-internet art? Because there's a group of artists who have taken this general universal awareness and they've made that very prosaic fact the subject, the focus of their artistic practice. While I'm very painfully aware that this is an imperfect term, that everyone has a lot of issues with it, the fact is it was, as we like to say, born in the wild. It's a term that didn't come from an historian looking back and saying this is what we shall call 2011 to 2020, but rather artists saying, what are we doing? What are you doing? What's happening in the studio? And then coming up with this term post-internet as something that would describe not only a way of making objects and images, but also a way of thinking. It's this double-layered nature of the post-internet that is probably its defining characteristic, because you need the historical moment, you need the fact of the prosaic nature of the universality of the internet before you can have the possibility of an artistic practice based in that strata. On the other hand, you do have positions where the prevalence of the internet is going unquestioned, where artistic practice hasn't yet caught up with social realities. This is one of the reasons it was so interesting for me as a curator who's been based in China or Greater China for the past 10, 12 years to do an exhibition like this in China, because we're looking at a completely different set of digital, technological, social, and cultural possibilities, and yet you still have the same kind of lust or desire for this idea of the post-internet. It's something that gets under your nails as an artist if you're coming through this system, and makes you want to propel that forward in some way. Where does the post-internet come from? Of course, on an art historical level, this is a question that has been debated endlessly, and I expect it will go on for as long as it's interesting to talk about the post-internet, which could be another 6 months, it could be another 5 years, it could be 50, we'll see. The strangest discussion I've heard is that the post-internet comes from surrealism, that it's a return to kind of the sheer joy of the bizarre. that it's a way to break up the banality of universal culture as it's been spread more or less across the world by the internet. I think this is 90% wrong, let's say. We'll give it 10% because there is certainly a joy in the discovery of the bizarre image, of the quirky object. But I think that's largely accidental or incidental in that that comes more perhaps out of the DIY movement and queer theory, queer culture from the late 90s and early 2000s. I think the core thrust of post-internet, at least as it's imagined in this work, is the pictures generation, it's appropriation of images, it's the adaptation of images to new purposes, and on a political level, it traces a rather wandering line back to institutional critique. That's a question that hasn't yet been completely explored on an exhibition level because it requires access to much larger collections and a greater historical depth than we've been able to do so far with these exhibitions. But I think it will prove interesting when the time comes. By the way, I've been working in this kind of post-internet mini art world for a few years now, so sometimes it's kind of spiraling down the K-hole. If I start using weird terms or things that are unfamiliar, please feel free to throw a hand up and stop me so we can clarify points like that. I want this to be kind of very sensible as much as possible. Of course, video art has also offered a lot of the ways into the post-internet, particularly in terms of ways of working. Collage practices, montage practices. Internet video is a really, really interesting vernacular. Even though internet video is kind of treated as a separate genre that maybe has closer ties back towards net art, the reason for that distinction, I think, is part of this market cynicism that surrounds the post-internet. The fact that you have a small subset of artists who could be kind of put under this post-internet rubric for the way they're treating painting, kind of looking at the way digital technologies affect how a painting can come to be on canvas, or how the digital eye can affect, the way around. The way that digital technologies can affect the painted image as it appears on the computer screen, or the way that the digital vision can affect what the painter is doing on canvas with material in the studio. Some of the artists who are exploring these questions have encountered success in the market, which is not a crime, but has certainly pushed them into their own space of the post-internet art world. And so there's this critique that the post-internet is a way of making objects out of what was once an idea-based art world. This is sort of the ideal of 1990s net art in Berlin and shared studios. And it's a moment that passed for a lot of reasons. The market generally not really being one of them. There are still artists who are working in that way. And there are, of course, artists who have moved from that new media or net art politicized world into a post-internet methodology more proper. Cory Arcangel, of course, is the best example here, where a lot of his work now is object-based, sculptural, ready-made appropriation. And of course, he's someone who saw much greater success in the museum system, in the institutional world after that shift. I think the major reason there is that post-internet art, unlike net art, has something to say to the art world. It's a self-referential genre in both the best and worst senses of what that can mean, because it is focused on speaking to the gallery system. In a way, the production of objects based on internet culture is an indirect critique of how objects are circulating throughout the gallery and museum systems as they have traditionally existed. But it's a critique that isn't entirely negative. It's what we would probably call an accelerationist critique. It's about not celebrating, but certainly enjoying the celebration of those capitalist systems. This is another reason why it's been exciting for me to work on these projects in the Chinese context, is because accelerationism is alive and well as an artistic ideology there. You have artists who are just purely trying to game the market based on their studio process, producing paintings kind of for the reason of accelerating a market that they disagree with. Of course, everyone's always happy to take the check home at the end of the month. And also the accelerationist ideologue Nick Land, one of the original proponents of these ways of thinking, has been living in Shanghai for, I think, gosh, almost a decade now. It's somehow become the native territory for these questions, which is why I believe that the post-internet way of thinking will kind of come to terms with its own political reckoning, with its own possible relationship with capitalism in that art system before that happens in the Western art system. When we speak about post-internet art, what we'll see in a minute is that post-internet art is fundamentally concerned with its own digital appearance, with its own reproduction. This is especially the case, I find, with artists who are working outside of Berlin and New York, because while artists who are in those places have the entire force of the mainstream art media behind them, if you're working in Shanghai or Sydney or San Francisco, you're kind of basically off the map of the art editors who are sort of producing what it means to be mainstream contemporary art in a global sense. And so documentation becomes incredibly important, both on a practical level and on an ideological level again, because it's the image, the circulation of the image replaces the circulation of the work in a very tangible way, which I think can't help but affect how that object or how that image is produced. This is another moment where a cynical observer will kind of come in and say that the artist should kind of be alone in the studio and not thinking about how the work is moving. It should be about the purity of process more than it is about how the object is received. But again, I don't think it's a careerist position to be thinking about documentation and circulation. I think it's a recognition on a philosophical level even of how artwork is received today. And it's tied to a lot of demographic and economic trends. Just thinking about the massive explosion of the art world, that there are now hundreds of thousands of artists active in the world rather than the thousands who are available kind of to us in the mainstream media. And so the act of positioning one's practice closer to the core of discussion in the art world is not necessarily about selling the work so much as it is about giving that work a discursive position. It's about finding a way for the work to speak to other work, which is why this idea of an image has become so powerful, the image of the work. And at the same time, it's why you see a lot of work that's lumped under the post-internet umbrella looking pretty similar. You have kind of a color palette that's produced pretty often. You have the use of sheet glass as a sculptural element, which you could call sort of a replacement of the screen. It's interesting, you have fewer and fewer artists who are interested in these ideas actually producing video. Those who are producing video are generally still doing it exceedingly well in a way that fits not only with their practice but with the questions that they're interested in. But it's for some reason a much smaller number, and instead you have sculptural screens, sculptural glass. Video installation as a genre is almost disappearing within the post-internet umbrella. I'll be very curious to see what happens to this idea of video in space in the next 2 years, I think. You have generally a lack of human figuration appearing in this work, which is something we can talk about in relation to post-humanism once we get some work up here in a minute. You have the emergence of stock photography or generic imagery as a really central core of not only photographic practice but also painting and sculpture. This idea of the generic, of something that has no reason to exist other than its own circulation, is in a way a parody of what the post-internet is meant to be, and is why I think we're seeing much more of a turn now towards materialism, towards this kind of harsher materiality, and the idea that material doesn't need to be supported by imagery or doesn't need to be a support for imagery in order to circulate in its own way. I want to go back just briefly to where post-internet, this term came from, which I wanted to save till a little bit later, but it seems like it makes sense now. The first appearance was through Marissa Olson, who is an artist, a brilliant artist based in New York now, who actually invented the term, I believe, accidentally, when she referred to going online, looking at things, turning off her computer, and then going to make art. And for her, this was post-internet. It was like, it's like saying post-drinking or something. It's like, what do you do right before you make art? And that's your way of naming. But somehow it kind of escaped that context. It was a perfect phrase. This was 2006. It took about 5 years before the term really caught on. And the next major use was Jean McHugh, who won a Warhol Foundation Art Writers grant to run this blog that was just called Post-Internet for a year. And he filed, I think, almost every 2 days. It's an incredible archive of writing. If you ever have a lot of time on your hands and want to click through a Blogspot site. He wrote about everything kind of from a post-internet perspective, which I think is really exciting because he adapted this singular position, the idea of a post-internet critic, and then he went to exhibitions in Chelsea, exhibitions of drawing, architectural sketches. It wasn't only artists who were kind of putting themselves in this world who he was approaching. The fact that he did that and that he was one of the first people to use the phrase in this way opened up a lot of different lines of inquiry, a lot of lines of inquiry that are only now being followed up on, now that post-internet as a stereotypical aesthetic or a way of making art has kind of passed its prime. Which I think I kind of take that for granted, that 2011 was sort of the year of the post-internet. This was sort of when all of the art was appearing in the major galleries for the first time. It took a little bit of time in the media for the term to catch up. So if you go on Google Ngram or something, it will still give you maybe late 2012, early 2013 as the peak appearance. And the more that happens now, we have exhibitions that are called post-internet something, will of course affect that a little bit. But if you actually compare that with the work that's being produced, it's already maybe 2 years back. Which is why this was some kind of the right time to produce this art post-internet exhibition, because you have this kind of minute distance, the abstraction or the alienation of 1 year or 2 years that you can say, oh, that's what we were thinking of kind of between June and July in 2011. There's now a much broader critical literature that's addressing those questions. Guthrie Lonergan, Artie Vierkant, Brad Trammell. These are all artists who have written very, very extensive bodies of literature on what post-internet means. Brad Trammell's book is about what it means to be a young artist on the internet, which is a slightly adjacent position, whereas Lonergan refers to internet-aware art. These are all kind of terms that appear in a certain relation to post-internet art. Similarly, you have Seth Price's dispersion or Hito Sterl's formulation of circulationism, all of which kind of bring up the idea of the post-internet centrally and then want to come at that from a certain angle sort of altering it or mutating it and trying to push it in a new direction. Although they certainly never intended to, this has meant that post-internet has become kind of the neutral ground in between all of these competing claims, because there's no one who really wants to go out and sink their teeth into post-internet. No one's claiming it. No one's writing a book that says this is the history of post-internet. It's the only one that's not such a branded term, and somehow that's allowed it to become the brand that sort of acquires everything else as sort of minor diffusion lines. So thinking about positioning this exhibition that Karen Archie and I did in Beijing, it opened at almost the same time as another exhibition at the Friedrichianum in Kassel that was called Speculations on Anonymous Materials. I wish, well, it's not for me to do because I was so involved with one of these two exhibitions, but I think it could be really instructive to look at how these two things were formulated, and between them to kind of pull out which artists are sort of the most referred to in terms of post-internet, which themes are sort of universal and which are maybe belonging to the thinking of one or two curators here and there. Speculations was very much a thematic exhibition. It pulled out a couple keywords from important theorizations of the last decade. Speculations, of course, comes from speculative realism. Anonymous materials comes from the Iranian-Malaysian theorist Reza Negarestani, whose book was called Cyclonopedia Complicitous Materials, about the human relationship with material, with kind of this post-human matter. In retrospect now, not even a year back, that was extremely prescient to kind of push this material component, whereas for the exhibition in Beijing, that was only one of maybe 8 or 10 aspects that we were looking at. And that's because we were really trying to do maybe a first round criticism of what the historicization of post-internet art would look like. We really wanted to get at the roots of this movement or this moment and try to figure out where they were in the eyes of the artists who were involved before everything became too far removed, before we were looking back at kind of secondary sources and things like that. As an exhibition, we were very much interested in thinking of this as a survey. I think that's really important to recognize because it's so tempting to go out and find all kinds of creative practices that are somehow tangentially related or accidentally related to the post-internet. But our curiosity at that moment in time was really to figure out why artists were using the term and to kind of draw a graph of everyone who was willing to use this term. And so it was very much self-defined and self-referential. Everyone who was included in the show knew that it would be called Art Post-Internet and didn't have a fit about that. There were certainly people who suggested that it maybe wasn't their favorite title, but everyone was willing to be put in this box. And it's dangerous as a curator to be trying to put artists in boxes. It's kind of one of the most violent things that you can do, especially when we're dealing with artists who are generally between 25 and 32 years old. Certainly we don't want anyone to be stuck with this label of post-internet branded on their forehead for the rest of their careers. But the fact that the self-identification was there was very interesting for us. The collaborative aspect between Karen and I was also very important because she is based in New York and Berlin, but primarily in New York. I'm in Beijing and Hong Kong. So she's working with the majority of the artists who we included in this exhibition on a day-to-day basis, kind of doing the monthly studio visit, calling them up for benefit programs, putting them in her monthly reviews and things like that. Whereas for me, my only person-to-person interaction with a lot of these artists was sort of a once-a-year studio visit, or bringing someone to a residency in Hong Kong, or kind of producing one or two pieces of work for a larger group exhibition, which, the kind of group exhibitions we generally get to produce in Asia about Western art tend to be, American art, British art, German art, things like that. So it's generally included in a much larger picture. So we kind of had this good cop, bad cop dynamic of a one distant and one close that made it very exciting to hear how artists would phrase their input about work and about exhibition processes to one of us or to the other. In the end, we decided to take all of that information and use it to present the exhibition to different audiences. So of course, the exhibition began in Beijing with an audience who was largely unfamiliar, had certainly never heard the term post-internet before in its Chinese translation. There were no results online. Certain artists had a little bit of Chinese press. Only one had actually shown in Beijing before. So this distant knowledge of these artists became very important in terms of how to position and present them for an audience who was coming not only on their individual work, but their entire way of working, their genre, their community, for the first time. Of course, this entailed a certain work of summarization. The exhibition was intended to not be a statement about what the post-internet was, but to be something of an experimental methodology. We wanted to lay out who we considered the most central 30 to 50 artists of the post-internet movement, and then use our understanding of their most important work to draw out certain themes, certain questions, certain ideas. And in that respect, I think it was very successful. It wasn't until we were able to kind of bring this work together, not necessarily in a physical space, but to sort of lay it out in printouts on the floor, that we could really see groupings based on the ways that artists were working and the questions they were interested in answering, rather than questions of color or material. Material in particular being kind of the dominant mode of analysis in the mainstream art literature, kaleidoscope, moose, frieze, things like that. The only hiccup to this survey logic that put us in danger of becoming a thematic exhibition is the question of generational influence. We included in this exhibition amazing work by Dara Birnbaum from the early 90s. Dara Birnbaum, along with a couple other figures, including Louise Lawler, has been absolutely central to our conception of what the post-internet could be as a curatorial and critical methodology. But of course, she would not consider herself as belonging to this particular group of artists. Now, I say this as a point of danger because it almost gave us license to start looking at the post-internet as a generation, as a moment in time. Whereas if we were really being true to the idea of a survey, we would need to find out where it was coming from, not in an art historical sense, but in a social sense. Sort of who were the teachers who were looking over the studios where a lot of these artists were coming from, who were the writers who these artists were reading before they kind of came to this point in their careers. That proved to be a relatively banal or uninteresting line of discussion for us. Of course, it's easy to say a lot of artists came out of Frankfurt, a lot of artists read Rhizome, a lot of artists were kind of tied to this net art scene. And so we ended up coming up with this more synthetic background of pictures, institutional critique, of providing sort of an intellectual lineage, something that we were finding in the work rather than in conversations with artists. Once we had been able to tease that out from the genealogy of the work, a lot of artists came on board with the logic. And that sort of allowed this to remain a survey type approach, although I think there will be a more rigorous analysis of that historical progression that will need to happen soon. What we wanted to do with this thematic analysis of a historical survey is to be able to take a group of artists who, with very few exceptions, know each other, have exhibited together, have shown with the same galleries, have been collected by the same institutions and individuals, have been published together in similar magazines, their own writing, have responded to questions and reviews by the same critics. Really, it's a community. It's certainly beginning with Berlin, New York, after that maybe London, Los Angeles, Montreal, Toronto, a little bit in Paris, a couple smaller cities after that. Vienna is up there. But of course, very much a Western Europe, Western Central Europe, and North American situation. That is problematic, of course, because this is where at least the mainstream art world will be expecting its new ideas to come from, especially in this kind of post-relational, post-identity kind of moment. And so the core question now is, what's happening elsewhere? Why does the post-internet movement have to be defined in these places? And so we wanted to look at the social core and use empirical research to build out sort of a grid, a conceptual grid of what the post-internet is, and then to use those ideas to kind of look around the rest of the world and figure out how things are fitting in with that, which is not to say that we want to look to China, for instance, and then add 3 or 4 artists to the global roster of who is a post-internet artist, but rather we want to look to why artists in China are looking at different questions, what are they thinking about post-internet art, and how can we use their doubts, skepticism, and critique of the centralized version of the post-internet and use that to attack it in a way, to make something much more radical. The goal, of course, would be to build up this network of ideas, a two-way flow, or a multipolar flow at least, that would mean not only artists sitting in Beijing and reading contemporary art daily and Rhizome and getting ideas for their practice, but also artists sitting in Berlin looking to Australia and to Shanghai and trying to figure out why their version of the internet is so different from everyone else's. There are, of course, social, economic, and systemic issues there, which should be really the province of someone much better intellectually equipped to handle all of that. My work has really been with artists and in these conversations, trying to figure out how these influences and effects are perceived, more so than where they're actually coming from on that kind of level. So the themes that we have teased out here through the exhibition, the most important one would be the production, dissemination, circulation, and reception of the art object and the art image. And what's most important in that phrasing is the relationship between the object and the image. In certain artist formulations, for instance, Artie Vierkant, there is zero distance between the object and the image, or the object and its documentation, because the documentation that circulates online, on Facebook, as well as in the print media, is more true to his work or to his studio practice than is the object that you actually see in the exhibition. And we can maybe come back to this in a little bit, but he makes objects that are put on a gallery wall. They're kind of very simple shaped pieces, and then he photographs them in the exhibition space. and then alters them, does sort of a post-production process before the documentation is allowed to circulate. So if you were to go on the UCCA website and look up installation exhibitions of our PostInternet, what you'll see is sort of a airbrushed object in the back with its color kind of bleeding out into other people's work and across the wall. Which you would not see, of course, in person. In person, you would see kind of a very squared off, very moderate work on the wall. That is probably the most aggressive logic there, but I think that it would be difficult to be making work about the post-internet condition without thinking through this tie between documentation and materiality on some level. If that's the most basic logic, we moved from there into themes that look at how the universalization of the internet or of internet culture has affected parts of daily life and life as an artist. One of these is language. We talk a lot about International Art English, which is one formulation, or I prefer to talk about curatorial discourse, which is this very kind of dry form of writing. Well, it's what I'm doing right now, which it's very distant from kind of some of the rougher, readier, more raw, and more exciting writing about art that's happening today. But the benefit of this kind of language is it's very easy to circulate between places, between contexts, to generally build a shared vocabulary. It also moves far past language that's tied to art, because we can talk about visual languages, symbols, signs, emoticons, things that have taken on new lives. Siri, this kind of voice actor who accompanies us now, although to a much lesser degree than I think people who were working with Siri in artistic practice thought about a year ago or whenever that hit the market. The body is also tied very closely to language. You can kind of think about embodiment. The post-human body, Josh Klein, Timur Sitin, Katya Novitskova, there's a whole group of people who are thinking about kind of what the intellectual evolution of the post-internet means for the physical evolution of the human body, and also how the body is being extended in new directions. Machine vision is probably one of the most important ideas to come out of really this discussion of the new aesthetic, which I'll come back to in a few minutes, which did come to infect the post-internet conversation. But this idea of seeing as the machine sees, not only through the webcam, because that's sort of human vision, but infrared, other kinds of technology, ways that we're being interpolated by our machines, which becomes kind of broadly expanded in a philosophical sense when you can think of machine vision or prosthetic vision, not only in the way that our computers and robots are seeing us, but in the way that, for instance, our paintings and chairs are seeing us. That's something that's tied less maybe to the post-internet aesthetic, but I think is still kind of part of what it means to be thinking through the post-internet. I mentioned sort of the post-relational moment, and I think that's very important, but it's interesting where identity has landed in the post-internet matrix, because we have this almost radicalized version of identity politics that's between the material and the virtual, which it comes from transhumanism, from queer theory again, but the idea that the subject can interact as a very different kind of subject through computer vision and through social media, which can be very banal. It can be as simple as presenting yourself in a different way on a Facebook platform. For instance, Ed Fornieles has this amazing series of work where he will have people act as versions of themselves or versions of art world players. He did something like that with the New Museum. It was this kind of fake gala with collectors playing collectors and eating salami off of a naked woman in the sky room of the museum. Or you have on a much simpler level, Petra Kortright, one of her earliest works, webcam, where she is kind of playing with these floating graphics moving across the screen for the first time and thinking through how that becomes kind of an adornment and a way that the body can be presented in a way that could become a tool for feminism or could become a tool for the objectification of the female form. You have an intense number of possibilities there that, fortunately or unfortunately, is not inherently politicized until it enters into a particular form of artistic practice. I think the key there is that identity politics has become transitional. It's become about action rather than identity, really. It's become about representation and acting of what someone can be rather than what they inherently are. One of the aesthetics that's always pointed to in relation to the post-internet is stock imagery and sort of this corporate culture that comes along with that. I think that since modernism, at least, art has, post-war modernism anyway, art has always liked to mimic the language, the visual culture of corporate life and luxury, but what post-internet has done has been to bring together the corporate aesthetic and the luxury aesthetic. It's allowed us to live through the suture where we are both the product and the consumer, where the logic of luxury and the logic of selling that luxury product are now one and the same. This is, again, tied in with the accelerationist hypothesis in that it's not a very vitriolic critique. It doesn't do much. It kind of pulls down maybe the last barrier between product and capitalism, but ultimately allows the two to remain very comfortably part of the same whole. Again, it's a transitional phase, and I think that's something that could be further developed if it were to become the central thesis of a certain set of artistic practices, rather than kind of the sexy veneer that a lot of young artists passing through the post-internet look have been adopting at the moment. Finally, you have this idea of digital folklore, web folklore, which has two sides to it. One of these is taking the vernacular culture of the internet and then processing that through fine art, which is sort of, again, a repetition of the high-low appropriationist gesture. But at the same time, it provides an outlet for forms of contemporary culture that otherwise are largely ignored. This is one place where Chinese art has made an interesting contribution because the Chinese internet has such a specific sense of its own poetics, its own graphics, stickers, interface design, forms of language. And on the other hand, you have medium-specific conversations, the poetics of something like painting, photography, sculpture, and then interrogating how those can be developed or how those are being changed in the post-internet world, in the post-internet moment. These two things have yet to meet, kind of the vernacular of the internet with the vernacular of the media. Except for in very, very direct ways. So I think this will be, again, an interesting area to watch over the coming year. I think it'll be a relatively quick evolution. But today, for instance, we were just speaking about the artist Rachel Lord, who had an amazing series of kind of Turner-esque classical British landscapes that then had angry birds painted directly into the middle of them. And it's funny, it's simple, it's direct, and it says a lot about how artists are thinking through these two different types of vernacular folklores right now. And the last thematic that we pulled out of our survey was infrastructure, which is something that certainly comes from the net art new media institutional critique lineage rather than from the contemporary art side of the post-internet, and that's because it's so incredibly discursive. This is a side where you have criticism, artist writing, political critique built into work. Not coincidentally, this is probably the only one of these thematics where where video art remains a compelling force as a way forward. The essay film, for instance, has been extremely useful here with people like Lance Wakeling or Andrew Norman Wilson, who have been able to bring conversations into contemporary art that would otherwise remain the province almost completely of new media. In that way, the post-internet is an art of realism. All of these things, all of these elements, whether it's the Angry Bird, the landscape, the Googleplex, they're real existing things out in the world. They're not utopian, they're not dystopian. This is not to say that they're neutral, of course, but they're interested in speculating and using this kind of gesture that speculative realism and object-oriented ontology have delivered in projecting not a human imagination onto the outside world, but in speculating that there might be something beyond what we're living that could be a possible terrain for artistic practice. So to stay on the exhibition maybe for 2 more minutes, there were 3 critiques of this exhibition that I found really interesting and have kind of helped me decide how to move forward from this position. The first, and we knew this ahead of time. When we were preparing the exhibition, I gave a presentation to the scholarly advisory board of the Yulin Center, and one of the Chinese artists who sits on that board, artist curator, one of the most accomplished minds and voices in the Chinese art world, said, when you do museum exhibitions in Beijing, if you do foreigners, you can only have 1, because otherwise no one will remember the names. And if you show Chinese artists, you have to have more than 5, because otherwise people will assume that you're in a conspiracy to promote a certain artist, rather than that artist promoting you, as apparently it should be. So we found this really interesting, and because of that kind of made a choice that we didn't want to make this a particularly authorial exhibition. We didn't want one voice to kind of stand out with 15 pieces, 1 in each thematic section, who would be the memorable position. Instead, what we were looking for was for post-internet, for this term to be the one name that people would remember. Why were there no Chinese artists? Again, because we were looking at a schematic survey logic rather than as a thematic. So we didn't want to come in and say, okay, who are the Chinese artists who are making work that's adjacent to this genre, but rather wanted to first sketch out artists who were already connected to one another. Because people were so interested in wanting to know who the Chinese artists were who should be in relationship to this exhibition, my next project has become tracing that out and kind of figuring out from China, Korea, Japan, the Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia, what could be called post-internet in a thematic sense. That's something that I'm hoping we'll be able to figure out kind of through this curatorial program this week, at least on a level of how we might go about thinking through putting something like that together. The second question we had about the exhibition, which really, really surprised me, was why are there no computers in the show? And I think if everything I've said up to this point makes sense, that maybe that's a question that doesn't need answering too much, because we're not positing the post-internet again as a moment after the internet, but nor are we positing the post-internet as sort of the super-internet, which is, I think, what part of our audience was expecting. They wanted the hyper-internet. They wanted like 3D glasses and kind of this immersive experience. The third critique was that this exhibition wasn't didactic enough, that it didn't use these kind of thematic grids as its point of departure. And as much as that was intentional, I think that as curators, we've perhaps overlooked the freshness of post-internet, even at this point where, to us who have been immersed in it for 5 years, it's already 5 years old. It's kind of the starting position. But I think more work remains to be done in terms of contextualizing, offering these thematic interpretations to a broader audience, and really engaging in critical writing that's not about the term post-internet. It's not about an argument of whether or not artist A or B belongs to the post-internet movement or generation or moment, but really getting into the practices themselves, dissecting the materiality, the questions that are being asked. Post-internet, in that sense, really should be receding into the background and fading away as a topic of discussion at this moment. One of the important questions there is this idea of artist rating, which we've been talking about a lot today, because a lot of the available literature that uses the term post-internet was authored by artists, particularly earlier in their careers before they really kind of got on the gallery circuit, or it was when they were writing an MA or a BFA thesis or something like that. So artist rating and also commercial galleries. Commercial galleries have been equally, I think, constitutive of the post-internet. And my approach to that question is not the cynical one that it's because it's easily marketable work, because at the time it wasn't. 5 years ago it was difficult to get anyone interested in looking at this kind of work. But galleries just frankly responded more quickly. They were able to kind of work artists into their program, to move things around more quickly than certainly the museums, because it took until 2013, 2014 for only 2 museums at this point to stage post-internet shows, although there are now at least 5 or 6 more in large development. So there will be a major post-internet survey in Paris this year, one in Poland next year, and one in London also next year, which will be major, kind of much higher profile exhibitions than either of these that we've worked on so far. Marley Mull, so this is a perfect example of the first category we were talking about, this kind of dispersion and circulation, because she's looking at smoking as a social network. Much less interested in Facebook, much more interested in kind of these casual ties back to the classic 1970s sociological theory, the strength of weak ties, the idea that you can learn more from someone who you happen to bum a cigarette from on the street corner than you can from your best friend on Facebook, because you already know everything from your best friend on Facebook. And that's a good direction to get into sort of these network dynamics, sort of moments in cultural theory that are not only informing the post-internet, but also coming out of this post-internet moment and making their way back into cultural criticism and into art criticism. I mentioned that object-oriented ontology has been adopted by a lot of the artists who are interested also in post-internet art. For me, OOO was really exciting when it first hit the scene because we finally had, first, an excuse to stop talking about relationships all the time and to just talk about things. I've always been, I think it's a personality thing more than it's an intellectual development, but the kind of curator who likes to go to studios and kind of see how paint is being applied and kind of the thingness of the object, how it gets there and where it goes and what's happening once it leaves the studio and how that sensibility can be retained in exhibition making. For a long time it was really, really uncool to talk about things like that. And I think the theorist who bridged these two worlds was David Josselett with his essay, Painting Beside Itself, which for me is the most important piece of theoretical writing, easily of the last 25, possibly 50 years. In fact, one of the early titles we were considering before we settled on Art Post-Internet for this exhibition was Everything Beside Itself. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this text, but essentially it's the argument that there are painters who are thinking through and embedding in their work what it means for painting to be socially positioned and what it means for the social network that creates the painting to also be involved in the circulation and reception of painting. And if you put aside the idea of internet culture, that's really what post-internet art is for everything, for sculpture, for photography, for ideas even, in that philosophy as a kind of concept-generating machine is sort of exposed with this internet logic and allowed to become an aesthetic reflection of its own workings, which is again another reason why OOO and post-internet art have this really interesting link, because OOO is probably the first serious intellectual school to be accepted both in the academy and in the mainstream media to have come from the blogosphere. A lot of the kind of core discussions came along on Levi Bryant, Graham Harman, and Tim Morton's blogs. The other reason, of course, is that OOO infamously assumes aesthetics as first philosophy, even though it is, of course, an ontology. This is, we don't need to get into kind of the philosophical mechanics here, but the ontological relationships of OOO claim that it's the encounter between the thing and the appearance of another thing that's the central relationship, which is aesthetics. That's what it is to kind of look at a painting. But what OOO tells us is that it's not just anymore about a person looking at the painting, it's about how the painting relates back to the artist. And this is how the circulation of the work becomes so important. This is the painting beside itself, the object beside itself. We're running a little bit short on time, and I'm really interested in getting into discussion and maybe some questions, but I did want to talk a little bit about some other theoretical positions that have been informing the post-internet. For now, I'll just say that new materialism is probably the other most important moment. And of course, media theory in its German bent, which is a materialism. It's about what the object is, what the technical object is even. That could be a JPEG, kind of getting into code discussions, or it could be the computer itself. For the post-internet, the physical object of the computer is much more important than anything that you could be doing on the computer. Ian Bogost has an amazing quote when he was sort of pushing back against the new aesthetic. The new aesthetic was a moment a couple years ago pitched by a couple British designers and artists who were interested in how glitches were appearing in physical reality. They were interested in prosthetic vision or machine vision, but how it kind of came into our negotiation of the physical world. I just wanted to read this one line from Bogost, who said, "Why stop at the unfathomability of the computer's experience when there are airports, sandstone, koalas, climate, toaster pastries, kudzu, the International 505 racing dinghy, and the Boeing 787 Dreamliner to contemplate?" His argument being that these new ways of seeing shouldn't only allow us new modes of vision, but should allow us new kinds of subject positions, new things to inhabit and think through in a much more radical way. Again, even with all of these philosophical groundings, you'll notice that with the exception of Negrestani, they're all coming from the Western world and primarily the English with a little bit of German-speaking worlds. This is presents a major problem in terms of regionalism and universality, whether or not the post-internet as a logic certainly likes to present itself as universal. It likes to tell us that we're experiencing the same internet everywhere, which is blatantly false. The post-internet is a provincialism, nothing else. It's a region. It belongs to its own region. It belongs to the American internet and the culture that's distributed across the American internet. I would imagine that in the Australian context, we're a little bit more closely situated to that American internet than the artists who I've been speaking with recently in Beijing, Shanghai, or even Hong Kong. The joke in China is, of course, that there is no internet, there's only a Chinese intranet, which is not only a logistical or infrastructural question, it's not only about censorship, it's also about traffic patterns, the way that data flows. Most internet coming from the Western world lands on one island in the Chongming archipelago off of the coast of Shanghai. It's a military island where China Telecom and the People's Liberation Army process all of that signal before it's redistributed. They don't censor anything there. They're primarily located there because they need an open signal. They want to use that to look out at the outside world. They want to understand what will later be blocked by the Chinese ISPs and why. But this is also a cultural logic. The Chinese art world, I should say, uses the internet in very different ways. Instead of Contemporary Art Daily, China has Art Baba. I'm not sure if anyone has ever been on the website Art Baba. It's kind of an old-fashioned BBS style system where anyone can go on and upload anything, generally photographs of large exhibitions, which immediately get watermarked with Art Baba as soon as they get uploaded. But it's a place to yell at people. It's where you go to say, that artist is an asshole and this show is terrible. But it's also structured in a really, really interesting visual way because you can just have this endless vertical flow of image upon image stacked over each other. And it's slight differences like that, the structure of this website versus Contemporary Art Daily, where you have albums you have to click into and then you get larger images, better quality, professionally shot images, that I think structure what it means to talk about regionalisms of the post-internet. These are the kind of differences that need to be thought through not only region to region, but comparatively between places, between communities, between even artist studios who might be working across the street from each other, because you do have this kind of interpenetration of the Chinese internet world now with artists living in Berlin, and to a slightly lesser extent, European artists living and working in Beijing. I'd like to wrap it up with that, with this kind of open question of what it means to reject the universalism and the universalizing ideals of the post-internet, and instead to refocus on how we might be able to think of these supposedly universal ideas as regional in a cultural sense, but also in a community sense. So I'm here kind of at the end of this hour in a position of curiosity. I'd like to know what it is that defines your communities and the communities that you've studied, and how the ideas that come out of the post-internet might resonate there without necessarily redefining or being imported wholesale into those positions. Thanks very much for your time.